Okay, let's dive into a corner of the global economy you might not think about every day. We're looking at the cyanamide calcium derivative market.
Yeah, exactly.
Ever wonder what drives, massive growth in these really specific chemical industries?
Hmm.
Sometimes peeling back the layers on like seemingly niche areas, it can actually reveal some surprising economic trends and maybe even opportunities.
It really can. And what's fascinating here, I think, is that we're basing this deep dive on some very specific uh, forward-looking data. We're
Right.
pulling directly from an analysis that covers the market's path from 2021 all the way out to 2033. It's powered by cognitive market research.
Got it. So our mission today is pretty straightforward, really. We're going to try and unpack the key numbers, the growth trajectories and how things look region by region based on this source.
Yep.
It's about helping you get a quick, clear handle on the landscape and, well, the future projections for this specific market.
And maybe just for context, before we jump into the numbers, what are these derivatives like mainly used for, just to frame it?
Oh, good question. That's actually, yeah, a crucial starting point.
Hmm.
The source is mostly focused on the market numbers, but these derivatives, they're key components in, well, several big industries.
Yeah.
With agriculture, they're used in fertilizers, soil conditioning, that sort of thing.
Also,
Also in metallurgy for processes like nitriding steel,
okay, yeah.
and even, in pharmaceuticals and other organic synthesis processes. So understanding those uses helps frame why a market like this might see such substantial growth.
That makes sense. It connects it back to real-world stuff.
Exactly. It's not just some abstract chemical name. It's tied to, fundamental things like food production, industrial processes.
Got it. Okay.
So with that context, let's unpack the big picture globally first, using the numbers from the source.
Absolutely. So looking at the global market size presented in the analysis,
Yeah.
back in 2021, the cyanamide calcium derivative market was valued at $5,657.12 million. Let's call it $5.6 billion roughly.
Okay, $5.6 billion in 2021. And this source projects that to grow significantly.
It shows it reaching $9,035.87 million,
Mhm.
so just over $9 billion by 2025. So just a few years later.
Right, pretty big jump already.
But here's where it gets, well, really interesting. Looking further out to 2033,
Hmm.
the projected value jumps dramatically. It hits $23,052.5 million.
Wow. Wait, say that again? Over $23 billion.
$23 billion.
From about $5.6 billion in 2021.
Yeah.
That's more than quadrupling in size in, 12 years?
Exactly. It's a massive expansion.
So what does that translate to in terms of like an average growth rate? A CER?
Well, that kind of expansion is reflected in the projected overall global CER, the compound annual growth rate.
Okay.
The source puts that at 12.42% across the whole period, 2021 to 2033.
12.42%.
Well, yeah. And just to clarify, CAGR is basically the average annual growth rate over those years. It smooths things out, shows the consistent pace.
Right.
And a double-digit KGR like that over a decade, that points to really dynamic growth expected for this market, globally speaking.
12.42% compound annual growth for over 10 years. That is substantial.
Oh, yeah, it is.
It definitely underlines, accelerating demand in those areas you mentioned, agriculture, metallurgy.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, what does this mean when we start breaking it down geographically? Like, where's this growth expected to be most concentrated?
Yeah, that's the next layer. If we connect this global picture to the regional breakdown in the source, we see the growth isn't, perfectly even everywhere.
Right, makes sense.
The analysis gives us a pretty detailed country-by-country view within the major regions. It shows where that expansion is projected to be, well, most intense.
Okay, let's unpack North America first then. What does the source show there?
Okay, North America. The regional market value started at $1,159.71 million in 2021.
So about $1.16 billion.
Yeah, growing to $1,826.42 million by 2025. And it's expected to hit $4,507.24 million by 2033.
Okay, so over $4.5 billion by 2033. And the regional CAGR?
That comes out to a projected 11.95%. So, solid growth, tracking pretty close to that global average pace we saw.
Almost 12%. Okay, and within North America, the U.S. must be the big player.
Oh, absolutely. The United States is clearly the largest market, started at $897.62 million in 2021.
Nearly $900 million.
Projected to reach $1,382.83 million in 2025, and then surging to $3,318.71 million by 2033. So well over $3.3 billion just in the U.S.
Okay. And then there's Mexico.
And then there's Mexico, started at $115.39 million in 2021. projected to reach $203.56 million by 2033.
Right.
Oh, Mexico. And then there's Mexico. Started at $115.39 million in 2021, projected to reach $203.56 million by 2025, and then growing significantly to $562.96 billion by 2033.
Okay, so still substantial growth, but the source highlights Mexico's CAGR specifically, you said.
Yes, exactly. Mexico's projected CAGR is 13.56%.
Oh, interesting. Higher than the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, the source notes this as the highest within North America.
Huh.
And given those applications we talked about, like agriculture, industry,
Right.
this higher growth rate might suggest maybe accelerated adoption
Yeah.
or perhaps increased intensity of use in those sectors within Mexico compared to its neighbors.
Yeah.
Could be specific initiatives, industrial expansion, something like that.
That's a great point. Yeah, the numbers alone kind of hint at different dynamics, even within one continent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's shift over to Europe. How does it stack up?
Right, Europe. The market there was valued at $1,651.88 million in 2021, so bigger than North America initially.
Okay, around $1.65 billion.
Projected to rise to $2,582.27 million by 2025, and reaching $6,356.07 million by 2033, so over $6.3 billion.
And the CAGR for Europe? Similar to North America.
Almost identical, actually. The European regional COR is projected at 11.92%.
Wow, okay. Very consistent there. And Europe was the second largest region globally in 2021, you said?
Yeah, just behind Asia Pacific.
Okay. And who are the key players in Europe, according to the source?
Well, it highlights a few key contributors based on their 2021 and projected 2033 numbers. The UK, for instance, went from 300...
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
2033 numbers. The UK, for instance, went from $346.90 million in 2021 to a projected $1,504.32 million in 2033. So big growth there.
Yeah, over $1.5 billion.
Germany was $289.08 million in 2021, forecast to reach $1,149.19 million in 2033.
Okay, also over $1 billion.
And we also see significant starting numbers in 2021 for France. That was $132.15 million. Italy, $115.63 million, and Russia, $148.83 million.
Yep.
And the source indicates steady growth through the period for these countries and others too.
Plus, it mentions other smaller but growing markets, Spain, Sweden.
Yeah, Spain, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the rest of Europe segment all lumped together shows considerable growth too, from $388.03 million in 2021 to a projected $1,447.36 million by 2033.
So broad-based growth across Europe, pretty much in line with the global picture.
Seems like it. But then we turn to Asia Pacific. And this region tells, well, maybe the most compelling story in terms of sheer scale and pace of growth.
Oh, really? Okay. What do the numbers show there?
So Asia Pacific, it was already the largest region globally back in 2021, by quite a margin actually. $1,923.42 million.
Almost $2 billion to start.
Exactly. And it's projected to continue leading, growing to $3,172.35 million in 2025, and hitting a massive $8,506.14 million by 2033.
$8.5 billion just in Asia Pacific.
Just in APAC, yeah.
Wow. So what about the CAGR? Is it keeping pace with that huge scale?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, and it kind of points to where the market's center of gravity seems to be shifting.
Okay.
The regional CAGR for Asia Pacific is projected at 13.12%.
13.12%. So higher than the global average and higher than North America or Europe.
Exactly. And the source specifically highlights this. It's noted as the highest regional CAGR mentioned in the entire analysis.
Ah, okay. So it's not just the biggest market, it's also projected to be the fastest growing region overall.
That's what the data suggests, leading on both fronts.
Okay, so let's unpack the countries driving that growth. China must be huge there.
Dominant's probably the word. China started at $763.6 billion in 2021.
Right.
Projected to reach $1,267.36 million in 2025, and surging to $3,445.11 million by 2033.
So over $3.4 billion just for China. That's a huge chunk of the regional total.
It really is. Japan is another significant contributor, going from $353.91 million in 2021 to a projected $1,466.29 million by 2033. Still substantial growth, nearly $1.5 billion, but maybe not quite the same percentage jump as some others in the region.
But within Asia Pacific, the source points out one country with a particularly remarkable growth projection.
Yes. India.
Oh, yep.
India stood at $242.35 million in 2021 and is projected to reach $1,189.33 million by 2033.
Okay, so growing to over $1.1 billion. Still smaller than China or Japan in absolute terms.
Right. But the source highlights India's remarkable CAGR. It's projected at 14.16%.
14.16%. Wow.
Yeah, the analysis notes that it really stands out even within this high-growth APAC region.
That's incredible.
And given the role of agriculture and industrial development in India's economy, this figure strongly suggests accelerating demand for inputs like these derivatives in those key sectors.
Yeah, a 14.16% CAGR is definitely remarkable. Points to some powerful drivers, specifically in India. And the source also mentions others, South Korea, Australia.
Yeah, South Korea, Australia, Singapore, Southeast Asia, Taiwan. They're all mentioned as showing steady double-digit growth across the period. And the rest of APAC's segment also contributing significantly to that overall high regional CGR.
Okay, so APAC is definitely the region to watch. What about South America?
Moving on, South America. The total market there grew from $345.09 million in 2021 to $538.51 million in 2025. And it's projected to reach $1,322.07 million in 2033. It's over $1.3 billion.
Okay. And the CAGR for South America, back in line with Europe and North America.
Very much so. Projected CAGR of 11.88% for the region.
Right. And the source notes Brazil as a leader there.
Yes. Brazil's highlighted as a leading market, projected to grow from $136.99 million in 2021 to $550.19 million in 2033.
Okay.
And the source also lists Argentina, Colombia, Peru, and Chile as contributors, with the rest of South America's segment projected to reach about $178 million by 2033. So solid growth across the continent.
Okay. Now, the Middle East. What are the numbers telling us there?
Middle East. This region starts smaller, $265.89 million in 2021.
Right.
Projected to grow to $434.07 million in 2025,
Right.
and then $1,154.15 million in 2033. So over $1.1 billion.
And the growth rate, the CAGR.
This region also displays a notably strong projected CAGR. It's 13.00%.
13%. So right behind Asia Pacific then, one of the fastest growing regions.
Exactly. And again, thinking about applications, maybe metallurgy, perhaps agriculture in certain areas, this high rate suggests increasing industrial activity or specific application demand kicking in.
Saudi Arabia is listed as the leader there.
Yes, leading the Middle East market.
Yeah.
Valued at $100.48 million in 2021 and projected to reach $462.99 million by 2033.
Nearly $500 million just in Saudi Arabia.
And the source notes that the UAE, Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, and the rest of the Middle East are also showing robust growth. The projected KGRs of that collective group range from 10.9% up to 13.7%.
So strong growth seems widespread across the Middle East, too.
It reinforces that picture, yeah.
Okay, finally, let's touch on Africa.
Right. Africa. The market there was $311.14 million in 2021, expanding to $482.24 million by 2025, and projected to reach $1,206.88 million in 2033, so just over $1.2 billion.
And the TGRI for Africa?
The regional TGRI for Africa is projected at 12.15%, so actually slightly above the global average.
Interesting. And any specific countries highlighted?
The source specifically mentioned South Africa and Nigeria emerging as key markets within the continent.
Okay, and the rest?
With the rest of Africa's segment contributing a projected $529.05 million by 2033.
Okay, so we've covered the globe. What does this all kind of boil down to when we synthesize these numbers and projections from the cognitive market research analysis?
Well, it paints a really clear picture, doesn't it? A global market expected to undergo massive expansion, more than quadrupling in just over a decade.
Yeah, it certainly highlights strategic growth opportunities globally, but it also really shows us where that acceleration seems most pronounced.
Exactly.
We see the overall market is dynamic, sure, but then these specific pockets are growing significantly faster than the average.
That's the key takeaway, I think. The source data, just by showing these varying growth rates, it underlines areas like the entire Asia-Pacific region.
Right.
And specific countries within it, like India, plus Mexico and North America.
Yeah.
And the Middle East region overall. These seem to be on the leading edge of this expansion, according to the projections.
So those are the places where demand for these cyanamide calcium derivatives and agriculture, metallurgy, manufacturing, whatever it is expected to accelerate most rapidly over the next 10 years or so.
That's what the numbers suggest, yeah.
It's fascinating how digging into the numbers of, a specific market like this can reveal these broader economic currents, these shifts in demand across different parts of the world.
Hmm.
It's not just about the chemical itself, it's about the industries it supports, like you said at the start.
Absolutely. So just to quickly summarize our deep dive into this analysis, we've seen the truly significant global growth projected for the cyanamide calcium derivative market, more than quadrupling from 2021 out to 2033.
Yeah, that global number is huge.
And we've also unpacked how that growth breaks down regionally, highlighting the fastest growing region overall, Asia Pacific,
Right, the leader in size and speed.
and zeroing in on specific high growth countries like India and Mexico, as well as that robust pace across the Middle East, all based on the data presented in the Cognitive Market Research source.
It's a really powerful illustration of dynamic market forces at play, even in sectors that maybe seem a bit out of the spotlight usually.
Definitely. And maybe here's a final sort of provocative thought for you, the listener. Rooted only in those varying growth rates across regions and countries that the source provides.
Okay.
Consider what the
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
regions and countries that the source provides.
Okay.
Consider what those different growth speeds might imply. What could they suggest about, say, the pace of industrial development in different areas, or agricultural modernization, or maybe evolving manufacturing practices in those specific parts of the world? Now, the source material itself, it focuses on the market numbers. It doesn't explicitly state why, say, Brazil is projected to grow faster than France, or why India is accelerating ahead of Japan in percentage terms.
Right, it's just giving us the what, not the why.
Exactly. But the numbers alone kind of invite us to infer, don't they, based purely on these figures. What might you conclude about where the demand for the applications of cyanamide calcium derivatives is surging most? And maybe what could be driving that differential acceleration globally? Just something to ponder.
Okay, let's get into this. We're doing a deep dive today looking at the sources you sent over on the cyanamide calcium derivative market.
Right.
Sounds pretty specific, I know, but it actually touches on some really big global issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, this isn't just some obscure chemical formula. It's really fundamental to, well, feeding the world and also driving certain industries.
So our mission today, looking at your material, is to kind of pull out the main story. What's driving it, what the challenges are.
Exactly. Cut through the jargon.
Right.
What are the key drivers, the hurdles, and, the interesting trends? Where's it all heading?
Okay, so let's start with those drivers. Looking at the sources, the big thing seems to be this dual role it plays: soil treatment and fertilizer.
That's really the core of its agricultural use. It's like a 2-for-1 deal for farmers. It conditions the soil, yes,
Yeah.
but it also provides essential nitrogen.
But it does more than that, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. The sources highlight this really well. It also acts as a sterilizer, essentially. It helps control pests, fungi, even weeds, all at the same time as fertilizing,
Oh.
which is, incredibly valuable. Especially if you think about agriculture-heavy regions, say Asia, Latin America.
Yeah.
They need to maximize every single harvest.
Right, maximum yield. And it's not just agriculture, is it? The industrial side seems pretty significant too, based on your sources.
Definitely. Away from the field, it's actually a crucial chemical intermediate, a building block.
Meaning?
Well, its chemical structure is quite reactive, which makes it perfect for synthesizing other high-value compounds. Things like dicyanamide,
Okay.
which goes into laminus, flame retardants, or thiourea, used in textiles. Even certain pharmaceuticals rely on it as a starting point. It has real industrial reach.
And let's connect that agricultural piece back to the really big picture you mentioned earlier, feeding a growing population.
Yeah.
The sources mentioned, 8.5 billion people by 2030?
That's the projection, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And more people means needing vastly more food, quickly.
So these derivatives help.
They're a tool to help boost output,
Mm-hmm.
especially for staples like wheat, sugarcane, rice, and particularly in soils that might be a bit depleted from intensive farming over years.
Right.
So for you listening, understanding this market means understanding one piece of that huge global food security challenge we're all, facing.
Okay, so the value proposition is clear. Demand makes sense. But, like you said, hurdles. The sources definitely flag some major restraints. What stood out?
Well, the biggest ones are probably the environmental and health risks. That came through strongly.
How so?
If it's not used correctly, there's a real risk of contaminating soil, water. And for the workers handling it, there are potential health issues. It requires very careful handling, proper gear.
Which sounds expensive and complicated.
It adds layers of cost, yeah, and complexity. It's not something you just sprinkle around casually.
And I guess that ties right into regulations, regulatory hurdles.
Absolutely. You see that especially in places like the EU, North America.
Hmm.
Very strict environmental and safety laws.
Makes it tougher to sell or use there.
It definitely increases the complexity, the cost of compliance. It's a significant barrier in many of those developed markets, for sure.
And another thing the material mentioned was competition from alternatives that are seen as safer.
Exactly. There's a growing preference, both from farmers and consumers, for organic inputs, things perceived as more eco-friendly.
So that's eating into the market share.
It's definitely shifting the competitive dynamics.
Yeah.
Traditional chemicals like these derivatives face more pressure now from those alternatives.
Okay, challenges noted. But it's not all bad news. The sources also pointed to some opportunities, some positive trends, right? Technology seems key.
It really is. Things like precision agriculture are making a difference.
How does that help here?
Well, instead of broad application, technology lets you apply the chemical precisely where it's needed, when it's needed. GPS, sensors, that sort of thing.
Targeted application.
Right. Which makes it much more efficient, uses less product overall, and critically, it reduces the environmental runoff and exposure risks we just talked about.
So tech is helping manage the downsides.
Yeah, it shows how even in these, seemingly older chemical markets, technology is driving change.
And what about R&D? Is there work on making the products themselves more sustainable?
Yes, definitely. A lot of research is going into things like controlled release versions.
So it releases more slowly.
Exactly. Less initial impact, potentially safer, and also combining these derivatives with organic inputs, trying to find a kind of best of both worlds balance.
Balancing productivity with ecology.
That's the goal,
Yeah.
finding that sweet spot.
And the last big trend highlighted in your sources seemed to be geography expansion into new markets.
Huge growth area. We're seeing much faster adoption now in many emerging economies. Think parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America.
Why there specifically?
Well, many of these countries are really investing in modernizing their agricultural sectors. There's government support, plus strong internal demand for higher crop yields. So they're embracing tools like these derivatives maybe more readily now.
Okay, so quite a journey. We've seen the powerful drivers feeding people, industrial chemistry. We've tackled the serious challenges, safety, regulations, competition, and looked at how tech and new markets are pushing things forward.
It really does sit at a fascinating and I think crucial intersection. You have the need for productivity for food, for industrial materials,
Right.
balanced against the absolute imperative to manage environmental impact and health risks. It poses a really interesting question, especially for you having looked through this material. How do we best manage that balancing act? Particularly with potent chemical tools like these. It's something worth considering.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai